Hi everybody, it's Smokey Bear here, and today we are going to do one of the staples of smoker cooking, a nice slab of pork ribs. What I have here is St. Louis cut ribs, and all that means is the flap of meat that would normally be up here if it wasn't St. Louis cut has been trimmed off. Doesn't really matter, you can do this with the St. Louis cut or not, but it's a little bit nicer and easier to work with if you get the St. Louis cut and then that flap of meat that's up here is already trimmed off for you. So the first thing that you have to know about ribs, the key to getting good ribs is to get that slimy membrane off the back. You can see it's kind of shiny here, and this is a slab of ribs where I've already peeled the membrane off, and you can see the difference between the two. So this is what we want to achieve. The tricky part about that is getting a hold of this thing because it's kind of slippery. So you can see I've got it started here. I've started peeling the membrane back. So we're not trying to get all the fat off. That's where the flavor is and it keeps the meat moist, but we want to get this membrane off. The easiest way to do that is to grip it with a paper towel so that you can hold your grip. And sometimes it peels off very nice and easily. Sometimes it needs a little help. So take a spoon and just put the spoon underneath to help peel, and then you can kind of roll this up in the paper towel. Sometimes you'll hit patches where you have to fight with it a little bit, but sometimes it'll just peel up in big chunks. That's why we need a paper towel. It might tear, that's all right. It's all going in the trash anyway. Where it gives you some resistance, that's where you want to put the spoon underneath it and kind of help it get going with the spoon. When you get to this part of the meat, you can see that the membrane kind of curves here. That can be a little bit tricky. It'll tear a little bit, but the membrane doesn't go completely from edge to edge. The membrane ends right around here. So get another piece of paper towel to help hold on. And there might be just a little bit here. I suppose you could trim that if you wanted, but this isn't really going to be a problem. If you leave the membrane on, the meat will still cook and the meat will still be tender, but the eating of it won't be quite as pleasant because you'll have this membrane that's really not edible, and you don't want your family or your guests having to struggle with that when they're eating. Alright, so this is what it looks like when you've got the membrane off. If you want, you can trim some of these little flaps right along here with a good sharp knife, but that shouldn't matter too much. Sometimes if there's a lot of fat back here, I may trim little pieces of that off, but again, that's where your flavor and your moisture will come from, so you don't want to get too much of that fat off. Okay, now that we've got the meat all nicely trimmed up, in the Masterbuilt smoker that I use, I can't fit an entire rack on one shelf in its whole form. If you cut it in half, then you can rotate it and fit an entire rack on one shelf. So to start with, I'm just going to cut this in half, and then when you put it in on the shelf, we'll put it in this way, and that way I can get 4 racks of ribs in the smoker at one time, one on each shelf. Doesn't matter if you cut it now or after you season the meat, but if you cut it before, then you can get some seasoning on this edge. The other part of ribs that makes them very specialized and unique to you is the rub that you use. There are dozens and hundreds and maybe thousands of rub recipes out there. If you enjoy it, then it's the right rub for you. There's nothing magic about it. The rub that I'm using today has brown sugar, pepper, chili powder, paprika, garlic powder, and salt. And I'll put the recipe in the description below. So now that we've got our ribs all prepared, put the rub on there, and you add as much or as little as you like. It's best if you go ahead and put your rub on the meat the night before and let it sit in the refrigerator and let those flavors really soak in. I didn't do that last night, so I have a couple hours before smoking. I'll put my rub on right now. Some people use mustard before they add the rub, and I do that on some meats, but I tend to not use the mustard on ribs. I just let that rub sink right into the meat. Okay everybody, we're back. It's been a couple hours since we put the spice rub on the ribs, and I've just put them into the preheated smoker. I preheated for about a half hour at 275, and now I've reduced the temperature to 225, and these are going to smoke for 6, maybe 7 hours. You can see that it's helpful to have these cut in half in order to put them on the shelves. The other nice thing about doing it that way is you can use a variety of rubs, or if somebody in your family doesn't like ribs quite as spicy, you can go a little bit lighter on some of the hunks of meat. So we've got our ribs in here, and in the water pan, I just used water this time. After the first 2 or 3 hours of cooking, I'm going to use just a little squirt bottle. This is filled with fruit juice. You can use apple juice or any other kind of fruit juice. And once an hour, after the first 2 or 3 hours, we're going to open the smoker and just kind of spritz the ribs to help them stay a little bit moist. So we'll see you in 6 or 7 hours with wonderful smoked ribs. And you can use any wood. Pork often goes well with apple wood. I like a stronger flavor, so I'm going to do hickory smoked ribs. If hickory is nice but a little too strong, you can do a mix of hickory and pecan wood to kind of soften the flavor a little bit, but I'll be using just hickory wood today. Alright everybody, it has been 6.5 hours with hickory smoke, and you can see the ribs are just beautifully done. They've got a lovely color. That's some bark there from all the seasoning. The meat is fall off the bone tender. There's a bone coming out right there. And you can see it's still nice and juicy inside. Tender, moist, beautiful hickory flavor. These are excellent ribs. Couldn't be any easier. Enjoy!